As we saw in the built-in reports, it's possible to create visualizations from our report data. Let's create a visualization of our own from the errors in our access log. To start, we'll search for source type equals access combined. And let's also add and status equals 404. And we'll search for that. You may have noticed before that there's a little chart here that shows up above the search results. Go over to Format Timeline, and you can see the full version, which adds some annotation here. This is the most basic visualization you'll get with Splunk, and it will really only show you the event counts over time. In order to get this into a friendlier visualization format, we'll need to tell Splunk what we actually want to visualize. Since this is just the 404 errors, an error count indexed against time is what we really are looking for. So let's add to this pipe time chart count, and we'll search. Without any other changes, this will tell us the count of results that match this search, and it'll be bucketed into 30-minute intervals. Let's take a look at that time count pop up again. You can see it offers a couple of suggestions. If we had multiple hosts, different web servers, we could actually split this up by host, which might be interesting too. Let's add something to the beginning of our query. We'll add or status equals 200. So now we can compare the file not found errors, which is a 404, with the successful connection errors, 200. Let's search for that. And you can see it is combining them both into one. So we'll need to add one more thing here, which is by status. So time chart count by status. And now it's splitting those out into two separate values. Now that we have our data in a format that might be interesting to look at, we can click on visualization. And here is the default chart that it generates. It might also default to one of these other options. So if it shows up as a line chart, you can see that's not the most useful for this type of data because it smooths over the differences between the sections. So picking a column chart gives us a little more helpful of a view. If we go to the Format button here, we can configure some other options. Now with this data, I think it would be more helpful to see it stacked. So the errors are on top of the successes, just so we can see those together. Or if you wanted to understand the ratio between successes and errors, we could use this stacked 100%, and then it'll actually show them so that the total takes up 100% of the space here. I'll leave it as stacked. The multi-series mode will let you split this out into two separate charts, one above the other. And you can also turn on some labels for the data values. So if you turn this to on, it'll show you all the values. If you say min and max, it doesn't make the most sense with this data, but it'll show you the biggest one and the smallest one for each of these. You can configure some of the labels and how the labels are rotated on the X and Y axes. You can also set things like the interval here. So if we change this to 20, then it'll count up by 20s in the display of the axis. We can set a min value and a max value. So if we wanted to say minus 100, which doesn't make sense for this particular data, but if there was a positive negative, it would make sense. And we could do a similar thing with the max. Chart overlay can be useful if you have something like a ratio between these that you want to display. So it will overlay one of the values over the top of the other. So if we had 3 to display, it'd be a bit more interesting here. Legend will let you adjust the legend. And the last thing to point out here is this trellis mode, trellis layout. If you enable that, it's a bit like the multi-series mode, but here it shows these charts side by side. If you had a lot of different data points or a lot of different values you wanted to chart, this would be a way to show more of them on one screen. And we can split it up by different options here, like the aggregation here.